This poor college student named Lee Soo was too poor to afford a suitcase here. Looking at the expensive diamond ring, she fantasized about owning one herself, but she never expected the man next to her, Hae Young, to buy the most expensive ring without even asking the price. Meeting such a wealthy man, Lee Soo naturally didn't want to miss out, so she followed Hae Young closely. Hae Young noticed and asked her what she wanted. Lee Soo was at a loss for words. She tried to leave. Hae Young thought she liked him and called her back. Lee Soo had no choice but to ask for the receipt for the diamond ring. She planned to use the points to redeem it for something else. Seeing Lee Soo's pleading eyes, Hae Young was at a loss. Just then, his phone rang. Lee Soo learned from the call that he was struggling with how to help the person he was pursuing clean up. She offered to teach him the method in exchange for the diamond ring receipt. Soon, Lee Soo ran off with Hae Young's receipt. What Hae Young didn't expect was that Lee Soo had bought him a pair of household gloves. She said that if he could personally help the person he liked with chores, the other person would be deeply moved. Lee Soo then turned and left. Hae Young looked at the cheap gloves in his hands and felt helpless. But soon after, he received a text message from the girl he liked saying that if he could come and help her clean, she would be extremely touched. Lee Soo then used the receipt to exchange the gloves for the luggage she wanted. But when he returned home, he was turned away by his sister Lee Dan. With nowhere to go, he had no choice but to spend the night in the school office. Just then, he accidentally discovered that the professor he had a crush on, Jen Woo, had been in love with the museum director Yoon Ju. To find out more about her, he went to the museum. Surprisingly, he encountered Hae Young again. She then vented her frustrations about Yoon Ju to Hae Young. However, after some introductions, Lee Soo realized that Yoon Ju was the person Hae Young was pursuing. Lee Soo felt incredibly embarrassed. To prevent Yoon Ju from threatening her, she pretended to be Hae Young's girlfriend, to provoke Yoon Ju into getting together with Hae Young. Hae Young thought Yoon Ju wouldn't mind, but Yoon Ju was actually jealous, so Hae Young went along with Lee Soo's plan. The two of them continued to show off their affection. Yoon Ju was so angry that she made an excuse to leave first. To thank Lee Soo for helping her, Hae Young treated her to a late-night snack. Just as the two were parting ways, Hae Young received a call saying his grandfather was critically ill. The gravely ill President Don Jae revealed his last wish. He wanted Hae Young to find a girl named Lee Soo, because he felt he had wronged Lee Soo for his entire life. This made Hae Young suspect that Lee Soo was his grandfather's illegitimate daughter. Although he was very reluctant, he still went to the destination for his grandfather's sake. However, to his shock, the Lee Soo he was looking for was the girl he had met not long ago. Combining their previous encounters, Hae Young couldn't help but suspect that Lee Soo was intentionally getting close to him. To be on the safe side, he stayed at Lee Soo's guest house. After spending some time with her, he discovered that Lee Soo was indeed an orphan. So Hae Young revealed his true intentions. Lee Soo couldn't believe it, but when she saw Hae Young's business card, she was utterly shocked. It turned out that Hae Young's grandfather was the president of South Korea's top conglomerate. If she was the president's daughter, she would instantly inherit trillions of dollars. Hae Young then took Lee Soo back home. The president had already arrived with a group of people to welcome her. Just as Lee Soo was utterly astonished, the chaebol president knelt before Lee Soo and called her princess. This left Lee Soo speechless. To everyone's surprise, the president continued to confess his sins to Lee Soo. This left everyone baffled. The president then revealed to Lee Soo her true identity as a descendant of royalty. At the end of the year, the last emperor, due to war and turmoil, was forced to flee. In order to find the prince who had been lost among the common people, he entrusted this arduous task to the president's father. However, the young and ignorant president fled with the funds just before liberation. He used that money to establish the Daein Group. From then on, he had always wanted to find a royal descendant to atone for his sins. Upon learning that she was the only princess in Korea, Lee Soo was stunned. However, compared to her royal lineage, she was more concerned about where her father was. To her dismay, the president shamefully revealed that his father had already passed away. Lee Soo couldn't accept this. She immediately stormed out in anger. Hae Young, who had been waiting outside the door, also wanted to know what had happened. With no one to vent her frustration, Lee Soo poured her heart out to Hae Young. She said she didn't care about her royal lineage. All she wanted was for her father to be alive. But now the president had shattered her dreams. She felt the president was being too cruel. Hae Young tried to comfort her. He then took Lee Soo back to her sister's house. But this time, they were once again turned away. Hae Young was puzzled by how strained the sisters' relationship had become. Lee Soo explained that both she and her sister were adopted and had never gotten along well since they were children. Seeing Lee Soo homeless, Hae Young brought her back to her own home. Once Lee Soo had calmed down, Hae Young served her dinner. Lee Soo enjoyed the delicious steak and temporarily forgot her sadness. But just then, Hae Young's phone rang. Upon learning that it was Yoon Ju visiting, he panicked. He quickly hid Lee Soo in the guest room. Then Hae Young Young opened the door to greet Yoonju. Lee Soo stayed hidden in the guest room, continuing to enjoy the stay. Just then, she suddenly felt the urge to use the restroom. She couldn't hold it in any longer. She hurriedly called Tae-young. However, faced with this unexpected situation, Tae-young was helpless. He could only tell Lee Soo to figure it out herself. But Lee Soo couldn't wait any longer. She threatened Tae-young to find a solution. Tae-young was at a loss. Yoonju noticed his dilemma and offered to leave. Just as Tae-young was about to send Yoonju away, Yoonju noticed Lee Soo's shoes. Tae-young tried to make up an excuse to brush it off, but Lee Soo couldn't hold it in any longer and burst out. The next day, the president held a press conference and announced that he would spare no expense to rebuild the Korean royal family. He also promised the entire society that on the day the royal family was re-established, he would donate all his assets to society. The news spread like wildfire, causing a stir among the public. Everyone was discussing the matter. At that moment, Lee Soo was still enjoying her meal in the university cafeteria, completely unaware of the gravity of the situation. Just then, Tae-young rushed over to find her. But before Tae-young could take Lee Soo away, the journalists swarmed toward them. To prevent Lee Soo's identity from being exposed, Tae-young quickly used his own clothes to shield Lee Soo. The two then fled at full speed. The journalists chased after them relentlessly. Just as Lee Soo climbed into the car, the journalists quickly surrounded them. As Tae-young was trying to figure out how to escape, one of the journalists began to confront him, asking if the woman in the car was the princess. The scene became even more chaotic. The reporters all wanted to catch a glimpse of the princess. With no other option, Tae-young lied and said the woman in the car was his fiancée. Taking advantage of the reporters' momentary distraction, Tae-young quickly drove off. He then took Lee Soo to his own hotel. Seeing Tae-young rush her into the room, Lee Soo instinctively covered her chest. Tae-young saw this and explained that he wasn't interested in her. Lee Soo then praised Tae-young for protecting her. Tae-young took the opportunity to share his life story. He said that he had never had a father to take care of him since he was a child. If the president were to pass away one day, he would have to inherit the family business. Therefore, his private life had always been under the media's scrutiny. Now, the president was giving away all his property and not leaving a single penny for him. Tae-young was furious just thinking about it. Lee Soo felt a strong sense of empathy. She then opened her computer and found that the rumors about her identity had already made the news. Fortunately, her face hadn't been photographed. At the same time, the president saw the news. He was furious and berated his secretary. Yoonju, standing nearby, didn't care what was happening. She only cared whether the president was really going to give up all his property. When she found out that the president was determined to do so, Yoonju was completely enraged because the president had said long ago that he wanted her to marry Tae-young. Now it had been ruined by Lee Soo. This made Yoonju feel very resentful, so she immediately went to find Tae-young to discuss a plan. But as soon as she entered the hotel, she saw Lee Soo wrapped in a blanket coming out. This reminded her of what had happened at Tae-young's house earlier. Enraged, she immediately went to find her first love, Jin-woo. Seeing Lee Soo again made Yoonju even angrier. She immediately began to vent her frustration at Tae-young. Tae-young then explained everything that had happened earlier. In order to protect the president's property, Tae-young began to negotiate with Lee Soo, promising to help him achieve whatever he wanted. The only condition was that Lee Soo had to leave South Korea. However, Lee Soo refused to accept his identity as a princess, nor did he accept the fact that his father was dead. So the two sides remained at an impasse. Just then, Yoonju's father suddenly called. Lee Soo wanted to leave, but Tae-young said he would take her to see her father. Then Tae-young called for a helicopter. This scene reminded Lee Soo of when she was a child and her father was at the construction site. At that time, a helicopter had also flown to the site, and the person who came to find them was the president. Thinking that she would finally be able to see her father whom she had been separated from for over 20 years, Lee Soo couldn't help but shed tears of joy. But little did she know that soon after, the president took Lee Soo to a cemetery. He told Lee Soo that this was the grave of her father, Lee Han. Lee Soo couldn't believe it, but the president shamefully admitted that it was true. Back then, he had found Lee Han. He had hoped that Lee Han would rebuild the royal family, but Lee Han refused to do so, so he fled with Lee Soo in the middle of the night. The president discovered this and sent men to chase after them. Unfortunately, Lee Han died in a car accident during the escape. Upon learning the truth, Lee Soo couldn't forgive the president. She immediately left in anger. Meanwhile, Tae-young also didn't want his grandfather to donate all his assets to rebuild the royal family, so he suggested to Lee Soo that the best way to take revenge on the president was to overthrow the royal family. At the same time, he could also protect his own inheritance. To vent her frustration, Lee Soo decided to accept Tae-young's proposal and leave Korea to study abroad. She then went to the school to process her withdrawal. Yoonju, in order to protect her status as the wife of a chaebol, prepared all the necessary documents for Lee Soo's study abroad overnight. This gave Lee Soo a new understanding of Yoonju's character. As she was leaving the school, she encountered Professor Jin-woo, whom she had secretly admired for a long time. Jin-woo Jingwu had been researching the royal family, so he quickly guessed that Li Su was the princess the president intended to install. He then escorted Li Su home. At that moment, Hae-young also arrived. Since Jingwu was Yoonju's first love, Hae-young had always disliked him. As the tension between the two grew, they suddenly noticed that Li Su's sister had been stopped by reporters. Hae-young quickly took Li Su away. They then returned to Li Su's family's guest house. Seeing a stranger escorting her daughter home, Li Su's mother, Da-woo, curiously asked Hae-young about his background. This left both men feeling awkward. Hae-young then took Li Su to the airport. Although Li Su didn't want to be a princess, she couldn't bear to leave her family. Just as she was feeling sad, she was informed by security that she was prohibited from leaving the country. Li Su and Hae-young were both stunned, seeing that their plan to leave the country had fallen through. Li Su thought of the farewell letter she had left for her mother before leaving home. If her mother found out that she had planned to run away from home, she would definitely be scolded. She hurried home to destroy the letter. But the farewell letter had been tucked into the Bible and taken to church. The two of them had no choice but to rush to the church. They then sneaked into the church and sat behind her mother. After some coordination, Hae-young finally managed to get the Bible. However, when Hae-young flipped through the Bible, he couldn't find Li Su's farewell letter. It had been mistakenly handed to the priest by her mother as a prayer book. When the priest began reading the farewell letter, Li Su was speechless. She hurriedly took Hae-young and fled the church. Her mother discovered this and immediately chased after them. She scolded Li Su severely. Hae-young rushed forward to protect Li Su. The priest recognized Hae-young's identity. Upon learning that Hae-young was the heir to South Korea's largest conglomerate, Da-woo was shocked. After seeing the news about the two of them online, she mistakenly believed that they were planning to elope. Hae-young, in order to prevent Li Su's princess identity from being exposed, decided to go along with the plan and admitted it. Hae-young even asked Da-woo to agree to let them be together. Li Su, who was standing nearby, felt helpless. Da-woo, seeing this, was very happy. At that moment, the group's bodyguards arrived. Hae-young was finally able to leave. Hae-young then returned to persuade his grandfather to abandon the idea of donating his fortune. However, the president erupted into a furious tirade. He accused Hae-young of being just as good for nothing as his father. At that moment, Hae-young realized that his father had been expelled from Korea for opposing the restoration of the royal family. Hae-young was overcome with grief and anger. This made him even more determined to oppose the plan to restore the royal family. After returning home, Hae-young thought long and hard and finally came up with a plan. He immediately found a legislator who opposed the restoration of the royal family. He asked the legislator to lift the travel ban on Li Su. However, the legislator said that he had discovered a secret. Even if Li Su was not sent abroad, he could still overthrow the royal family. Meanwhile, Li Su suddenly remembered the love letter she had left for Jingwu. She hurried to the school to destroy it, but she was surrounded by a group of reporters. Hae-young rushed to the school upon hearing the news. The bodyguards blocked the reporters. Hae-young took the opportunity to take Li Su away. The two then went to a restaurant. Just then, the news reported information about the princess. The news revealed that Lee Han had been involved in multiple theft and other illegal activities before his death. People began to discuss it heatedly. Li Su was furious. To clear her father's name, she decided to change her mind and return to be a princess to guide public opinion. At that moment, the president arrived with his subordinates. She followed the president and left Hae-young behind. What Li Su didn't expect was that the president had already built a luxurious palace for her. Looking at the opulent palace before her, Li Su was utterly shocked. There were hundreds of palace maids and chefs assigned solely to serve her. Her bedroom even had a luxurious walk-in closet. The shelves were filled with shoes and handbags of every kind, leaving her eyes dazzled. The high-end evening gowns on the hangers were countless. She couldn't even choose which ones to pick. Li Su immediately immersed herself in this fairy tale-like dream and couldn't pull herself out. Li Su's adoptive mother never imagined that the orphan she had adopted was actually a princess. Faced with this sudden change in identity, Da-woo also began to feel at a loss. After obtaining the president's permission, Da-woo excitedly hugged her daughter. The president then introduced Li Su's background to Da-woo. Da-woo was deeply moved. She felt incredibly proud to have a princess as her daughter. After sending her adoptive mother back, Li Su asked the president to help restore her father's reputation. However, the president said that only the royal family could do so, and only Li Su could accomplish this. Therefore, he hoped Li Su would work hard to revive the royal family. Li Su felt immense pressure after hearing this. Meanwhile, Hae-young was also facing trouble. To punish Hae-young for obstructing the reconstruction of the royal family, the president sent people to Hae-young's home to confiscate all his belongings. Everything in the house was immediately sealed with seals. In the end, Hae-young could only take his personal belongings and leave his home alone. He wanted to see if there was any place he could stay in the houses under his name, but he found that all the properties had been reclaimed by his grandfather. At the same time, Li Su arrived at the mall with his butlers. The crowd quickly recognized Li Su and rushed forward to take photos. Li Su greeted the crowd enthusiastically. What no one expected was that Hae-young was also at the mall, taking out underwear. In order not to let Lee Soo see him in such a pitiful state, Tae-young hurriedly hid himself, but he was still discovered by Lee Soo. Tae-young was instantly embarrassed. With no other choice, he pretended to be calm. Seeing how glamorous Lee Soo was, and comparing himself to his own miserable state, he grew increasingly angry, so he came up with a plan. After Lee Soo returned to the palace, Jin-woo, whom she had been secretly admiring, suddenly paid a visit. Lee Soo was infatuated as she greeted Jin-woo. Just then, Lee Soo's phone rang. It was Tae-young calling. He threatened Lee Soo that if she didn't come out of the palace to meet him, he would announce to everyone that they were getting married. Lee Soo had no choice but to let Jin-woo take her out of the palace. This scene was witnessed by Chef Gun-hee. He thought the princess had been kidnapped. He immediately gave chase. During the chase, Lee Soo and Jin-woo collided with a construction site and were involved in a car accident. Lee Soo was quickly taken to the hospital. Fortunately, the doctor said the patient was fine and didn't need to be hospitalized. Tae-young, who was nearby, heard this and thought Lee Soo was faking it. She grabbed her arm and tried to leave, but Lee Soo screamed in pain. Jin-woo rushed over to stop her. Seeing Lee Soo about to cry, Tae-young finally believed that Lee Soo was seriously injured. She hurriedly went with Jin-woo to arrange for her hospitalization. While the two were out, Gun-hee quietly came to visit Lee Soo. To avoid being discovered, Lee Soo asked Gun-hee to return to the palace and pretend to be her. Hiding under the blankets, the palace maid noticed something was amiss and tried to lift the blankets, but Gun-hee waved her away forcefully. After the palace maid left, Gun-hee finally breathed a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Lee Soo continued to lie in a hospital bed, ordering Tae-young around, but after she finished drinking the water, she accidentally gave herself away. Tae-young angrily asked her why she was pretending to be sick. Seeing this, Lee Soo playfully let out a fart. With no other choice, Tae-young had to accompany her to the bathroom. Just as they were about to return to their room, they encountered a mother with a child in the hallway. Since there were no available beds, the hospital refused to admit them. Lee Soo saw this and gave up her bed for the sick child. She then checked out of the hospital. When they arrived at the car, Lee Soo began to look dazed. Tae-young thought she was pretending to be sick again, so she ignored her. But unexpectedly, Lee Soo fainted on the ground. Since the hospital had no available beds, Tae-young had no choice but to take Lee Soo back home. He quickly brought a basin of cold water to cool Lee Soo down. After helping Lee Soo change her clothes, he noticed the scars on her arm. Tae-young realized that Lee Soo wasn't faking it. He felt heartbroken. The next day, after Lee Soo recovered, Tae-young personally cooked a pot of porridge for her and fed it to her by hand. At that moment, Lee Soo realized that Tae-young had changed all her clothes. Lee Soo immediately scolded Tae-young, calling him a rogue. Tae-young ignored her. Later, Lee Soo noticed that Tae-young's house was covered in seals. Upon learning that she had become a princess and caused Tae-young to go bankrupt, Lee Soo felt deeply guilty. Just then, Lee Soo accidentally discovered a document. It was full of news articles slandering her father as a criminal. These articles were identical to what had been broadcast on TV. This made Lee Soo suspect that Tae-young was the one who had slandered her father. Tae-young vehemently denied it, but Lee Soo didn't believe him. The two began to argue. Lee Soo, furious, turned and left. Just then, the president came to pick up Lee Soo. Lee Soo followed the president out. What she didn't expect was that the president took her straight to meet the president. The president also stated that he would fully support her in rebuilding the royal family. With the president's support, Lee Soo became even more determined to become a princess. She moved back into the palace. Lee Soo thought she would never see Tae-young again, but to her surprise, when she woke up, Tae-young had become her royal advisor. Before she could figure out what was happening, Tae-young rushed to her bedside and began to tease her. Facing Tae-young's ambiguous advances, Lee Soo dismissed him with disdain. She only wanted to know why Tae-young was in her bedroom. Tae-young replied with a meaningful smile, saying that their relationship would undergo a significant change. Lee Soo later learned that Tae-young had been specially assigned by the president to be her mentor, responsible for her education and etiquette training, and would also be residing in the palace. Lee Soo strongly objected, stating that she had been involved in a scandal with Tae-young in the past, and the rumors had not yet died down. If others found out they were living in the palace together, it would be even harder to explain. However, the president believed that their teacher-student relationship could better clarify the previous rumors. Moreover, there was no one more suitable than Tae-young to serve as a mentor in the entire country. Seeing that the president had spoken so decisively, Lee Soo could only accept it. She had thought that Tae-young was just going through the motions and would leave soon. But to her surprise, Tae-young had already prepared a strict schedule for her. She had to get up at 6 o'clock every morning to study. Lee Soo was utterly shocked. For someone who loved sleeping in, this was nothing short of a joke. She simply chose to ignore it. But Tae-young wasn't going to let her get away with it. He grabbed the alarm clock and threw it into the bed. To avoid studying, Lee Soo questioned Tae-young's qualifications as a teacher. But to her surprise, Tae-young immediately pulled out all his teaching credentials. Lee Soo was speechless. To test Lee Soo's foundational knowledge, Tae-young gave her an exam. To Lee Soo's surprise, the test was entirely in English. She had no idea what any of it meant. She could only guess randomly. As expected, she scored 0. This left Hae-young feeling helpless. Lee Soo thought it was just a trivial test. However, Hae-young said he would hand over the test results to the president and make them public to the entire nation. Seeing herself about to become a laughingstock nationwide, Lee Soo panicked. She began to think of ways to retrieve the test paper, but Hae-young wouldn't let her get away with it. The two of them ended up in a standoff. Refusing to give up, Lee Soo decided to stay on Hae-young's bed. Hae-young had no choice but to agree not to hand over the test paper to the president, and promised to attend class on time the next day. The next day came quickly. However, Lee Soo overslept again, and was even calling out Jenwoo's name in her sleep. Hae-young, furious, picked Lee Soo up from the bed, and threw her into the pond in the courtyard in front of everyone. Seeing the princess in such a pitiful state, the palace maids couldn't help but feel sorry for her. After this incident, Lee Soo realized that Hae-young was serious. She dared not take him lightly anymore. Hae-young also devised a strict training plan for Lee Soo. According to this plan, Lee Soo had to study all the time except when she was eating, and she also had to get up at 6 in the morning and run in the courtyard to exercise. Lee Soo was shocked when she heard this, but in order to become a real princess, Lee Soo had no choice but to endure it. Soon after, Lee Soo's foster mother and sister were invited to the palace. Lee Soo was very excited because she hadn't seen them in a long time. However, she didn't expect that her adoptive mother had come to change her household registration. They wanted to remove Lee Soo from the household registration and transfer her to the royal household. This meant that she would be legally separated from her adoptive mother. Lee Soo found this difficult to accept, but for the sake of rebuilding the royal family, Lee Soo had no choice but to agree. Her adoptive mother signed the agreement for Lee Soo's happiness. Afterward, the mother and daughter embraced and wept bitterly. Even after her foster mother was taken away, Lee Soo could not stop crying. Hae-young, who had been listening outside, felt deeply moved. The next day, he had intended to comfort Lee Soo, but to his surprise, Lee Soo quickly regained her composure. She even took the initiative to say she would study hard. As Lee Soo began to settle into her new role, she increasingly began to resemble a princess. With the royal family reconstruction press conference approaching, Lee Soo's image makeover plan was also put into motion. The person in charge of Lee Soo's public image was none other than Yoon-ju, who had recently been promoted to chairman of the royal family's foundation. Facing the display of expensive clothes, Lee Soo felt thrilled. However, Yoon-ju coldly said, "Soon, Lee Soo will be expelled from the palace. Once the president dies, no one will help her." Lee Soo was utterly shocked. During the discussion about Lee Soo's princess image, Yoon-ju deliberately emphasized that the public must not be reminded of Lee Soo's past as an orphan and adopted daughter. The image consultants present expressed their concerns about the difficulty of achieving this. Lee Soo's confidence was severely shaken. However, Tae-young told Lee Soo that the hardships she would face were only just beginning. As long as she becomes a princess, there will be even more people attacking her, and she shouldn't be so naive. To make herself look less vulnerable, Lee Soo imitated self-defense techniques from a TV drama. Tae-young found this and was speechless. Soon after, Lee Soo's adoptive mother and sister were summoned to the palace. This time, the palace had prepared various expensive clothes for her adoptive mother and sister. Upon receiving the gifts, her adoptive mother and sister were overjoyed. However, what they didn't expect was that Hae-yeon announced something to them. Previously, the media had exposed Lee Han as a fraudster. In fact, the real fraudster was Lee Soo's adoptive father. Therefore, to clear Lee Han's name, he intends to reveal this truth. At that moment, Lee Dan was taking the bar exam. If her adoptive father's criminal record was exposed, her future would be ruined. So she became furious instantly. As a result, the two sisters began to turn against each other. Lee Soo didn't want to see her family hurt because of her, so she confronted Hae-yeon about why he was being so heartless. But Hae-young felt that Lee Soo was simply too greedy. He had become destitute because of Lee Soo's desire to become a princess. As a result, the two of them parted ways in anger. Desperate, Lee Soo turns to Jenwoo and asks him to help find someone who can prove her father's innocence. After learning about her predicament, Jenwoo agrees immediately. To thank Jenwoo for his help, Lee Soo invites him to dinner. However, she unexpectedly runs into Hae-yeon and Yoon-ju there. Seeing Lee Soo and Jenwoo so close, Hae-yeon felt a bit jealous. He began to mock Lee Soo. Unexpectedly, Jenwoo defended Lee Soo. Yoon-ju, who was standing nearby, saw the two men fighting over Lee Soo. Her resentment toward Lee Soo grew even stronger. Later, Jenwoo met with the president. In order to continue researching the royal family, Jenwoo agreed to join the royal family's conglomerate and became a director of the conglomerate. Soon after, someone who knew Lee Han called the palace. However, the call was deliberately blocked. Finally, The call was redirected to Hae-young's phone. Hae-young was very confused when he found out. He confronted Secretary Woo about why he had kept this from him. To his surprise, Secretary Woo said he did it to prevent Hae-young from losing his father. This left Hae-young completely confused. Under Hae-young's relentless questioning, Secretary Woo finally revealed a secret. Years ago, Hae-young's father, Tae-yeon, had threatened Lee Soo's father to prevent a restoration of the royal family. He had warned that if Lee Soo ever appeared before the president again, he would make sure they were eliminated forever. Since then, Lee Soo had been living in hiding with his father. Upon learning the truth, Hae-young was utterly devastated and also filled him with guilt toward Lee Soo. To make up for his guilt, Hae-young took Lee Soo to meet her father's old friend. With the help of the old friend, Lee Soo gradually recalled her father's past deeds. This made Lee Soo very happy. The two then went to a restaurant to celebrate, but unexpectedly, she got drunk. Hae-young had no choice but to carry her back. As they sat on the steps to rest, Lee Soo suddenly kissed Hae-young. Hae-young, seeing this, kissed her back. He then took Lee Soo back to the guest house. Lee Soo thought this was the beginning of their romantic love, but to her surprise, Hae-young was gone the next morning. Lee Soo rushed out to look for him. However, she was forcibly taken away by royal guards and put into a car. Lee Soo tried to escape, but the car doors were locked. Just then, Hae-young called her. Lee Soo answered and begged him to come pick her up. But to her shock, Hae-young coldly refused. Lee Soo was utterly baffled. Meanwhile, the press conference for the princess's arrival at the palace was underway. However, Lee Soo was nowhere to be seen. The venue soon erupted into chaos. Just as everyone was puzzled, Hae-young stepped up to the podium as the spokesperson. He solemnly announced that the princess was unable to attend the press conference due to personal reasons. He also announced that the press conference would be postponed. He then spoke on behalf of the royal family to clarify that the previous reports about Lee Soo's father being a fraudster were misinformation. The real fraudster was actually Lee Soo's adoptive father. The journalists were stunned by the revelation. Soon, Lee Soo's adoptive mother and sister also saw the news. Lee Dan felt that Lee Soo was sacrificing her future. She flew into a rage instantly. Upon seeing the news, Lee Soo rushed home. She wanted to explain to her family. However, no matter how many times she pleaded with her sister, Lee Dan refused to open the door. Lee Soo could only collapse helplessly outside the door, crying her heart out. At that moment, Jin-woo appeared. Seeing Lee Soo in such pain, he encouraged her to stay strong. He explained that compared to her family's current situation, Lee Soo's situation was even more dangerous. She had to choose: either give up her life as a princess and return to her family, or wipe away her tears and continue fighting. There was no third option. After hearing this, Lee Soo snapped out of her daze. She made up her mind to return to the palace. Meanwhile, Yoon-ju took advantage of Lee Soo's unexplained absence from the palace and ordered that all matters in the palace must now be approved by her. She then had Lee Soo confined to her quarters. To control Lee Soo, she even planned to send her to the hospital and have her pretend to be ill to explain her unexplained absence from the press conference. Seeing that she was about to become Yoon-ju's puppet, Lee Soo began to fight back. She immediately gathered everyone in the palace and announced in public that she would hold another press conference. Jin-woo immediately expressed his support for Lee Soo's actions, while Yoon-ju was furious. That night, the president gathered everyone for dinner. In order to eliminate the impact of the rumors between Hae-young and Lee Soo on the reconstruction of the royal family, the president decided to marry Hae-young and Yoon-ju. Lee Soo was utterly shocked upon hearing this. Hae-young, seeing the situation, immediately agreed to the marriage. However, no one expected Yoon-ju to refuse on the spot. When asked by the president, Yoon-ju stated that she did not want to marry out of obligation. Instead, she hoped that Hae-young would marry her willingly. The president expressed understanding. Yoon-ju knew that Hae-young's heart was no longer with her. She confronted Hae-young, asking why he had agreed to marry her. Hae-young explained that he had done so to spare Yoon-ju from losing face in front of her first love, Jin-woo. At that moment, Yoon-ju realized that it was her own actions that had ruined her relationship with Hae-young. Yoon-ju was left speechless. Meanwhile, ever since the president announced Hae-young and Yoon-ju's engagement, Lee Soo's mood has been terrible. She secretly cursed Hae-young. This awkward scene was witnessed by Hae-young. She took the opportunity to complain about being dumped, but Hae-young said she wasn't dumped and told her not to make excuses to stay up late, because tomorrow she would expose all of her information. Then Hae-young left dejectedly. The next day, Hae-young compiled all of Lee Soo's information. Lee Soo was shocked when she saw it, because the information listed all of her private matters. At that moment, her older sister Lee Dan came to the palace again. Lee Soo was very excited that Lee Dan still harbored resentment over the revelation of her adoptive father's past. She believed that Lee Soo had done it on purpose. To vent her anger, she started smashing Lee Soo's room. Just as she was about to attack Lee Soo, Hae-young arrived in time to stop her. To resolve the conflict between Lee Soo and her family, Young personally found Lee Su's adoptive mother and explained that it was all his decision. Taewoo finally understood Lee Su, but then Lee Su arrived. Seeing the door still closed, Lee Su couldn't help but pour her heart out to her adoptive mother through the door. She confessed that she had fallen in love with Young. However, Young was planning to marry someone else. This news left her heartbroken. After pouring out her heart, Lee Su left. She had no idea that Young was listening inside. Upon realizing that she had confessed her feelings in front of Young, Lee Su deeply regretted her actions. She hurriedly got out of the car to explain to Young, but to her surprise, Young sped past her. In the end, Lee Su had no choice but to flag down a truck and chase after him. When the driver heard Lee Su call herself a princess, he thought she was crazy. After catching up to Young, Lee Su immediately emphasized that she wasn't talking about him. However, this only made Young more certain that Lee Su was in love with him. Soon after, another press conference was held. This time, Lee Su was full of confidence. She believed that with her charm, she could leave a good impression on the public. Thus, she could convince the public to agree to rebuild the royal family. Just as she arrived at the press conference full of confidence, she unexpectedly discovered that there were only a few journalists present. All of this was Yoonju's scheme. Lee Su was at a loss for what to do. In order to continue with the press conference, she had no choice but to stand on the stage and deliver her declaration of moving into the palace to the few journalists present. Just then, Young found out that Yoonju had blocked the journalists from entering the palace. He immediately sent someone to give Lee Su a note, telling her that the journalists were all blocked at the palace parking lot. Lee Su understood immediately. She immediately announced that the press conference would be moved to the parking lot. Then she ran straight out of the palace. To speed things up, Lee Su took off her high heels, which were getting in the way, and ran barefoot to the reporters. At first, the reporters were unhappy about being blocked outside the palace. Seeing this, Lee Su quickly moved a chair over and stood on it. She then grabbed a megaphone and answered the reporters' questions one by one. Her bold and carefree approach immediately won the reporters' favor. The press conference was an unexpected success. The president was very pleased to see this. Young finally felt relieved after seeing her handle the situation successfully. Yoonju was furious upon seeing this. Afterward, Lee Su's popularity skyrocketed. She quickly became a national idol. The president took notice of Lee Su's immense popularity and wanted to use her as a spokesperson for his group. He ordered Young to arrange a meeting between Lee Su and the princess. Young politely refused the president's request. However, the president turned to Yoonju. Yoonju was eager for an opportunity to take revenge on Lee Su. She immediately approached Lee Su and offered to arrange for her to participate in a charity event at the orphanage where she had spent her childhood. Lee Su, upon hearing that it was the orphanage that had once taken her in, agreed immediately. Young, upon learning this, was furious. He immediately scolded Lee Su harshly. Lee Su didn't understand why Young was angry, so she let it go. At a critical moment, Yoonju once again asked Lee Su to participate in the activity. Lee Su knew that Yoonju had always had bad intentions toward her, so she cancelled the orphanage visit. But to not let the children down, Lee Su invited them to the palace. However, she didn't realize that this was essentially the same thing, because the president soon arrived with reporters. What was supposed to be a charitable activity instantly turned into a political stunt to boost the president's popularity. Seeing Lee Su at a loss, Young rushed forward to block the reporters and stated that the princess had no political intentions for this event and that the royal family would remain politically independent in the future. The scene erupted into chaos. The president was furious and left in anger. Lee Su couldn't understand Young's actions. She scolded Young harshly. Young, seeing this, could only explain that the president was using her to promote his own welfare bill. If Lee Su continued to support the president, people would suspect that Lee Su was giving the orphanage special treatment. If this continued, the orphanage would be ruined. To prevent this from happening, Young openly defied the president, essentially risking everything he had. Lee Su finally realized the severity of the situation. She was filled with regret. At that moment, Young could no longer contain his emotions. He wanted Lee Su to abandon all her fame and fortune and run away with him. However, Lee Su knew that if she did that, it would only cause Young even more harm, so she could only refuse. The next day, the news of the president's visit to the palace was reported. Because of Young's statement, Lee Su had no negative news at all, but Young himself was in a dire situation. Because he had publicly opposed the president, his position as a diplomat was immediately terminated. In order to protect Lee Su, Young decided to leave South Korea and go to New York to visit his father. He then went to a shopping mall to buy a suitcase. Who would have thought that Lee Su was also in the store? Ever since Young confessed his feelings to her, Lee Su didn't know how to face Young, so she hid inside the suitcase. However, Young had already noticed everything. To tease Lee Su, he directly bought the suitcase Lee Su was in and dragged her away. This left Lee Su extremely embarrassed. To avoid leaving any regrets before leaving, Tae-yeon took Lee-soo to the place where they first met. The two then happily took a photo together. After a day of sightseeing, the two gradually recovered from the awkwardness of confessing their feelings. When they returned to the palace, Tae-yeon packed his luggage and left silently. When Lee-soo and Jung returned to the palace, Yoon-ju scolded Lee-soo harshly. After listening for a long time, Lee-soo finally understood that Tae-yeon had been expelled for offending the president. She felt incredibly guilty and heartbroken. In order to keep Tae-yeon from leaving, Lee-soo chased after him to the airport and tried his best to persuade him not to go. Unexpectedly, Yoon-ju called at that moment and told them to hurry back to the palace, saying she had a surprise to announce. The two returned to the palace with confusion, and at that moment, Yoon-ju brought out the perfume pouch left behind by Queen Myeonjeon. This pouch was a family heirloom of the royal family's female descendants. Only a princess of the royal family could possess it. What Lee-soo never expected was that the one who now possessed the pouch was her own sister, Lee Dan. Everyone present was stunned. If this were true, it meant that Lee-soo was just an impostor. However, all of this was just a plot by Yoon-ju and Lee Dan. Back then, Lee Dan and Lee-soo were both taken in by the same orphanage. Lee Dan took the perfume pouch for herself while Lee-soo was suffering from amnesia. Later, they were adopted by the same family and raised as sisters. However, Lee Dan grew increasingly jealous of Lee-soo, who was always the favorite. When Lee-soo became a princess adored by the nation, Lee Dan was consumed by jealousy. Later, she learned that Yoon-ju was searching for the perfume pouch. She immediately teamed up with Yoon-ju to plot this fake princess scheme. President, of course, didn't believe Lee Dan was the real princess, but Lee Dan recounted her childhood escape with her father in detail, even describing how Tae-yeon chased them. And this detail was something even Lee-soo didn't know. Everyone was stunned, because only a few people knew this secret. Meanwhile, the news about the fake princess was spreading like wildfire thanks to Yoon-ju's behind-the-scenes manipulation. As the royal family's reconstruction was about to be ruined, the president was furious. He suspected that Tae-yeon was behind everything. This made Tae-yeon incredibly sad. But what hurt him even more was that his father's attempt to kill Lee Han had been discovered by Lee-soo. Lee-soo was completely overwhelmed. Yoon-ju threatened Lee-soo, if she didn't want this matter to be exposed to the public, she must immediately renounce her claim to the throne and leave the palace forever. At this point, Lee-soo was deeply in love with Tae-yeon. To protect Tae-yeon from harm, the next day, Lee-soo approached Yoon-ju voluntarily and stated that she would leave the palace. However, Lee-soo warned Yoon-ju not to get too excited too soon, because she was determined to uncover the truth behind her father's death. When she returned, she would repay Yoon-ju tenfold. After delivering her harsh words, Lee-soo packed her belongings. Then, she left the palace with her father's precious photograph. Meanwhile, Tae-yeon found the hiding place of Lee Dan and said he had sufficient evidence to prove that Lee Dan was an impostor. He urged Lee Dan to give up her ambitions to claim the princess's position. However, Lee Dan's true motive was never to compete with Lee-soo for the princess's position. She simply wanted to prevent Lee-soo from becoming princess. Therefore, she completely ignored Tae-yeon to prevent the sisters from continuing to harm each other. Tae-yeon decided to have Lee-soo's adoptive mother intervene as a mediator, but Lee Dan chose to ignore even her adoptive mother's phone call. Meanwhile, Lee-soo went to the police station to investigate the true cause of her father's death. However, she was told that the accident was just an ordinary car accident. The data had been deleted, so Lee-soo came up with a plan. When she first moved into the palace, she had offered a reward for information about her father's old friend. At that time, many people had called. She immediately asked the palace secretary for all the names. She then called each number one by one. However, there were simply too many calls. Lee-soo fell asleep in a cafe halfway through. The customers quickly recognized her as the princess. The cafe erupted into chaos. To avoid revealing her whereabouts, Lee-soo hurriedly fled the cafe, but she accidentally collided with a woman. The two immediately got into a fight. Just as Lee-soo was at a loss, Tae-yeon appeared. He casually pulled out a check and threw it at the woman. Then Tae-yeon took Lee-soo to Jin-woo's house and told her to rest there for a while. When the president found out that the princess had left the palace, he flew into a rage. He immediately sent Yoon-ju to find Lee-soo and bring her back. Yoon-ju quickly found Jin-woo's house. She threatened Lee-soo to go back and tell the president that she didn't want to be a princess anymore. Unexpectedly, Tae-yeon came over and took Lee-soo away. He then took her to a villa. As soon as Lee-soo reached the door, she faintly saw an old man smiling and walking out. This old man was none other than Tae-yeon's father, Tae-yeon. In that instant, Lee-soo's childhood memories flooded back. She realized that she had been brought here by Tae-yeon's father, and she was a child. And it was shortly after her father's death. She began to suspect that Tae-yeon had been hiding the truth from her. To find the truth, she decided to leave Tae-yeon behind and go back alone to confront the president and ask for the full story. She soon returned to the president's mansion. She confronted President Tae-yeon directly, asking him if he had killed her father. The president felt deeply ashamed. He admitted that his son had indeed threatened her father. However, Lee Han's death death was an accident. Although her father's death was not directly related to Taeyong, Lee Soo believed that if the president had not insisted on rebuilding the royal family, her father would not have died. Taeyong would not have been exiled overseas, and others would not be suffering so much. Thus, Lee Soo declared that he would abandon the plan to restore the royal family and stood up to leave. The president hurriedly dragged his elderly body to block Lee Soo's path. In an attempt to change Lee Soo's mind, he knelt before Lee Soo and begged for forgiveness. However, Lee Soo remained unmoved. The president, overcome with emotion, fainted. He was immediately taken to the hospital. Yoon-ju continued to pressure Lee Soo, claiming that the president's collapse was all Lee Soo's doing. Just then, Jin-woo pulled Yoon-ju aside and revealed that the pouch Lee Dan was holding was fake. The real pouch had been switched. If Yoon-ju continued to obstruct the royal family's reconstruction, he would expose Yoon-ju's actions. Yoon-ju was furious upon hearing this. She hurriedly found Lee Dan and gave her a large sum of money. She then told her to cut off contact with her family and leave the country to avoid trouble. Yoon-ju did this to shift all the blame onto Lee Dan. At that moment, Lee Dan realized she had been used. When Da-woo learned that Lee Dan was planning to flee, she urged her not to be so stubborn, but Lee Dan refused to listen. Just as she was about to flee, Taeyong revealed a harsh reality to her. Not only was she barred from leaving the country, but all the money Yoon-ju had given her was frozen, and she would never be able to see her family again. Lee Dan was terrified upon hearing this. Meanwhile, the president finally regained his composure. Lee Soo didn't know how to face Hae-young, so she ultimately chose to leave. Hae-young stood outside the door waiting to retrieve Lee Soo. After his relentless efforts, Lee Soo finally agreed to meet him. Meanwhile, Jin-woo convened a meeting of the royal family's financial council at the palace. Regarding the impact of the fake princess, Jin-woo initiated an impeachment against Yoon-ju and directly demanded that Yoon-ju resign from her position as chairwoman of the financial council. This proposal was unanimously approved by the council members. As a result, Yoon-ju was expelled from the palace. Meanwhile, Lee Soo discovered that Hae-young had held a press conference alone. He exposed all the things president had done over the years. Then, on behalf of his grandfather and father, he apologized to the nation. Upon seeing the news, Lee Soo rushed to meet Hae-young. Seeing Hae-young taking all the blame alone, Lee Soo felt deeply heartbroken, but Hae-young hoped Lee Soo would not feel guilty. He knew that only by revealing the truth to the public could the generations-old feud between the two families be resolved. Hae-young then went to his grandfather's bedside to apologize. However, the president did not blame Hae-young. Instead, he praised Hae-young for his courage, because he had finally been able to unburden himself of his long-held psychological burden. At the same time, the president also apologized for the misfortune he had brought upon Hae-young and his father. After entrusting the princess to Hae-young, the president died on the spot. Everyone present was deeply saddened. Just then, Yoon-ju's phone rang. The person contacting her was Taeyong. He was still making his final efforts to prevent the royal family from being restored. For this purpose, he had secretly met with a legislator who had been working to overthrow the royal family. Meanwhile, after the president's death, the question of who would inherit his massive fortune also needed to be resolved. According to inheritance law, Taeyong would directly inherit half of the estate. Only if Taeyong renounced his inheritance rights could the estate be used for the restoration of the royal family and return to society. To persuade his father, Taeyong decided to travel to the United States, where his father was located. Before leaving, he sincerely urged Lee Soo to return to the palace. After going through all these events, Lee Soo also felt that she should courageously take on social responsibility rather than evade it. Thus, she returned to the palace once again as a princess. The first thing she did upon returning to the palace was to declare war on Yoon-ju. She dismissed Yoon-ju from all her positions. From then on, Yoon-ju no longer had the power to undermine the royal family. After eliminating all the evil forces within the palace, Lee Soo began actively participating in various charitable activities. When she came to her senses, she realized that Hae-young had already left the country, and he was gone for several months. This made Lee Soo miss him deeply. She spent every day longing for Hae-young to return to her side. On that day, she finally received a text message from Hae-young. She was so overjoyed that she danced with excitement. She almost tripped and fell. Just then, Hae-young appeared in time to catch her. Hae-young had also brought back some good news. His father had renounced his right to inherit the estate. Now, all of the president's assets had been transferred to his name. As long as he agreed, the assets worth tens of billions would be transferred to the royal family. Just as everyone was waiting for him to sign, Hae-young remained silent. During an interview with reporters, a reporter asked if the royal family would return the inheritance to society if the referendum on its restoration failed. Hae-young asked the reporter if he would easily give up such a large amount of property. His words caused an uproar in the media. Everyone began to speculate whether he was going to monopolize the inheritance. Various factions were also scrambling to win Hae-young's support. Upon receiving the news, Jinwoo grew increasingly anxious. He immediately confronted Haeyoung, demanding to know why he was delaying signing the documents. Haeyoung replied with a meaningful smile, saying that everyone now viewed the inheritance as their own. People were only voting to restore the royal family out of fear that he would seize the inheritance for himself. Jinwoo finally realized that Haeyoung was exploiting people's resentment toward the wealthy to stir up national support for the royal family's restoration. Lee Soo, unaware of Haeyoung's true intentions, also began to panic. She started urgently urging Haeyoung to sign the documents. However, Haeyoung responded confidently, saying that if she wanted to become a princess, she would have to serve him well. To restore the royal family, Lee Soo had no choice but to begin flattering Haeyoung. Until the day before the national referendum, Haeyoung signed without hesitation. At that moment, Lee Soo finally understood Haeyoung's true intentions. Lee Soo was deeply moved. To thank Haeyoung for his efforts, Lee Soo accompanied Haeyoung to stroll through the night market, living a life like an ordinary couple. But what they didn't expect was that their appearance caused a commotion. Soon after, the national referendum began. The number of participants broke all previous voting records. The final result was that everyone supported the restoration of the royal family. Everyone was overjoyed with this outcome. However, new problems arose. Due to the exposure of his relationship with Haeyoung, many people accused them of using the restoration of the royal family as an excuse to evade inheritance tax. To avoid suspicion, Haeyoung had no choice but to go abroad to serve as a diplomatic ambassador. He was gone for 2 years. When the public outcry finally subsided, Haeyoung finally returned to the country. He intended to propose to Lee Soo. Lee Soo discovered this secret. However, the president, fearing that their relationship would destabilize the royal family and the government, sent him back to the United States as a diplomat. This left him torn. As a result, tensions between the two grew increasingly intense. To avoid leaving any regrets, Haeyoung proposed to Lee Soo before departing for the United States. However, Lee Soo was furious about Haeyoung's sudden departure. She turned and left immediately. In the end, Haeyoung boarded the flight to the United States with a heavy heart. Just as Haeyoung was sighing in despair, the face he had been longing to see appeared before him. Haeyoung was overcome with emotion. The film ends here. If you're interested, please like and follow us. See you next time.